clearly an empirical issue. You have to go out and see what people do. The second issue is really about the nature of rationality itself. We assume that people have all the information, and if they don't have all the information, then they can do enough statistical manipulation with what they know in terms of looking at the distributions and their various moments and optimizing them over the relevant policy variables. But that is a very strong assumption. In my book on financial crisis, I took a different approach. And this is something that meshes with an earlier approach called bounded rationality. Herbert Simon at Carnegie Mellon University developed this approach in the context of artificial intelligence, by the way. But he was also in the Department of Psychology. And psychologists, in a way, have known for a long time that people did not take derivatives and equate them to zero, especially facing uncertainty. But people had rather other ways of handling uncertainty. And people didn't have infinite computational power in their brains. And especially today's cognitive psychology and the research that has been done in this field and is being done clearly supports this view that human rationality is bounded. We cannot compute too much. We get confused quite easily. And we usually find some rules of thumb which may not be optimal. Some of them even may be actually detrimental to our own interests. But people behave like that all the time. Of course, you can teach them how to be more rational. And maybe with enough computer programming power, they would find all kinds of rational way to behave. In fact, that was the key idea behind some of these hedge funds. Like long-term capital management hedge fund. The idea was that very bright ex-physicists or mathematicians and computer programmers could find small opportunities for arbitrage. And then they would make big bets. And if you made enough big bets, then you'd make a lot of money, because other people are not thinking in as sophisticated ways as you are. There was only one problem, which is that when things go wrong, they also can go wrong in a very big way. And they did. And we saw that again during the recent financial crisis as well. So bounded rationality, I think, is a common enough feature in the real world. Then we have fuzziness, that people do not really think as crisply as we pretend in economics that they do. They are using qualitative terms like small, large, a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, etc. So how do we translate this into a modeling language? And this all can be brought together in models that are nonlinear dynamic models and really emphasize learning. And I will just mention some, and next week we'll probably discuss a little more of that. Now, in terms of well-being, which is the ultimate aim of economics, according to at least Tinbergen's school in modern times, but if you go back to Smith, you find the same thing in Smith as well. Smith is much deeper as a social theorist and economic theorist than most free market advocates think he is. He was, after all, a moral philosopher. And Sen has introduced this idea of capabilities in modern economic theory. So a general capabilities based approach is what we want to follow. And capabilities really mean positive freedom of being able to do certain things. So that really is a question about how we are able to function in our economic and social lives. Income, of course, can be used as a proxy, and in modeling we are quite often faced with the choice of using income or an incomplete specification of capabilities. In social accounting matrix, I will show that we can do both to some extent, but not completely. And we have a lot of work on income-based welfare indices. Economic literature is full of this. And we can do sensitivity analysis once we have arrived at some results. If we tweak the model a little bit, change some parameters, how big is the change in our results? And we have to do a causal analysis, as we have been doing. In terms of studying well-being issues, we have to focus on households and individuals within households. So household-specific characteristics, what is the socioeconomic status of the household, what kind of economic opportunities people have, which may be related to what kind of education they have, health status, human capital in general, whether the family is headed by a woman or a man, whether it is located in the rural area or urban area, all these. We also have institutional features that we must take into account in one way or another, because no household is an island unconnected with the rest of the economy. In fact, no household could survive in that manner. So we have to look at what institutions are there and how we should model them. We also have policy-induced features, as the diagram showed. And we also have macro-micro linkage. We have the household, but we have also the macro economy. And here, we can actually introduce a new idea that we can have simulations and we can form various scenarios. And that gets us away from a lot of sterile debate about statistical models, and I will show how. These are some of the policy areas trying to answer the question about relevance. In macro, we have the big issue of structural adjustment and how to move beyond that. In trade, we have the question of liberalization and how to move beyond that. And the specific example, numerical example that I will discuss will be actually in this area. Also sectoral policies, real and financial. We can ask questions about energy and environment, something that a lot of people are interested in. We can also ask deeper questions about policies for institutional change, how to change the institutions themselves. And last but not the least, about infrastructure and poverty reduction. So these are just some, not all, policy areas. And we do need an integrated approach that pays attention to dynamic efficiency, not just static efficiency at a point in time, but efficiency over time. And then capabilities enhancement in a relatively open context. The word relatively is important. I am not anti-globalization, but I think the rhetoric of globalization as full and complete and immediate liberalization is very dangerous and shallow. So we need to be very careful. And we do need what I call a sector-specific ingredients approach in a general equilibrium context or a disequilibrium context. In economy, except for rare instances, all the sectors are interconnected. In the first instance, one sector uses inputs from another sector, but also the output of this sector may be used as input in another sector. And the value added is distributed among capital, labor, and other factors of production. And finally, income goes to the households, and households spend money. So everything is connected. So we can make many different models. Broadly, there are two categories. One is called fixed price models. The other one is called flex price models. But they are really ideal types. Some prices may be fixed, others are flexible at any point in time at any particular economy. So there could be something like mixed mode models, which uses this observation that some prices are fixed and some prices are flexible. Now, if you want to link models with policies, which is the ultimate aim, then we have to be very cognizant about role of theoretical assumptions, about the role of initial conditions, role of data, and feasible mappings to policy space, and then how people can learn to be rational, but not in the kind of mechanical optimizing way. And that's where an example can be given of neurofuzzy model of credit allocation, which I have in my book on financial crisis. So we use several examples here on energy environment modeling, and much of it is based on work that I have done with co-authors, but some other people have done. It's only because I'm familiar with my own work better than I'm familiar with some other people's work. But of course, other people are doing work as well. The second example is choice of technology and employment, and income redistribution and employment. Third example, and this is the one that I will discuss extensively, is CGE models and poverty analysis. The pioneering work was done at Laval University in Quebec City. It's a very good place, actually, although winters are terrible. Well, this is just a flow diagram summarizing what I told you so far about the interdependence of economies. Product markets, factor markets, and distribution of income and consumption, the connections with the rest of the world through international trade and payments. So this is a snapshot of the economy. Now you can ask, what are the connections between trade and poverty? And we have to immediately recognize that trade policy and shocks operate primarily via prices. So prices are very important, and that's why we need a general equilibrium type of model, although part of it may be in disequilibrium from time to time. The second point is that changes in the price of goods affect factor rewards according to factor intensities. This is the standard theory of trade. And employment and wages will also be affected with the factor supply elasticity. Now, there are other theories of trade where adjustments occur in a much more complicated way. And there are structural features that keep markets from clearing immediately. Then about tariff cut, which is a specific trade policy. This policy will affect government revenue, but it is not inevitable that compensating tax increase or expenditure cut will impinge on the poor disproportionately. It is ultimately a political decision. So that part is really very important. And then this is very important for the poor. It may seem like a very small negative shock to us, but for the poor, it may be a very big shock, because the poor are poor precisely because they have very low income and very low capabilities. Then economic growth, of course, is important, but it is not a magic bullet. Many people think that trade liberalization is perceived to have long-term poverty reduction implication. But I will show that in most developing countries, this actually is far from a foregone conclusion. Our empirical results actually show many more problems than this theoretical conclusion implies. And there are not just transitional unemployment worsening poverty, there actually are also chronic unemployment, people who are just stuck, and trade policy cannot do anything for them. And there are such people in countries that are doing very well otherwise, for example, China or Brazil or India. So we have to recognize all these problems. Now, how do we do fixed price models? In the next lecture, I will say more about these things, but let me just mention input-output models, which have been quite common. And actually, a lot of states in this country, in the United States, use input-output tables for regional economic analysis. Then Stone, who was a research assistant to Keynes, developed a lot of the modeling approach after the war. And so Stone really took Keynes's theoretical approach a lot farther. And by treating government, capital, and the rest of the world as exogenous accounts in the input-output system. And then you can solve for endogenous accounts. And a crucial parameter is income elasticity of demand because it's a Keynesian model. In the next lecture, I will show the formal approach to this. In flex price, you are really looking at static flow equilibrium in product and factor markets. And the equilibrating condition is the excess demand, the gap between quantity demanded and quantity supplied at the equilibrium price should be equal to 0. So this is a very strict condition, and not all models actually are built on this condition. But there has to be at least something in the model that approximates this. This full employment assumption is another assumption that is questionable quite often. But if you show that some result holds at full employment, that is not so encouraging from the distributional point of view. You can argue that at less than full employment, it will be even worse. So this is what is called an a fortiori argument. You are actually making an assumption that is much weaker than the assumption that you want to make, and you show that even under that weak assumption, things are in favor of your hypothesis. Okay, and money really does not play a key role in this model. So money is just a unit of account. That is what this condition about numeraire choice means. And then you need technical assumptions like convexity, free disposal, and assumptions on demand and supply correspondences. This is the so-called Arrow-Debreu model of general equilibrium. In practice, you have to depart from many of these assumptions and still find a way to compute an approximate equilibrium. And in trade-focused CGE models, you have other conditions that are important, and I will not go through all of them. Again, the strict trade-focused CGE model is not very useful for developing countries especially, or even for developed countries, because there are all kinds of frictions in the real world that you need to model and not just assume away. There are also dynamic CGE models that I will not discuss during the course of this lecture. But so far, the models really are not as realistic as they should be. And so instead of doing dynamics, most of the times what we do can be called comparative statics, that we compare two different equilibria and see what we can say about this comparison. We can also have what are called non-Walrasian macroeconomic models. Asian financial crisis is one example, and I have a model that has, I think, 233 equations in 15 different modules that I used to study the Asian financial crisis. So I'll just pass it along because I cannot show 233 equations in a meaningful way. But this is an example of departing also from this Walrasian model. The model that I will actually end up discussing has, I think, about 54 or 55 equations. That's a lot easier to discuss, and money does not play any real role in this trade-focused model that we'll be discussing. But if you want to analyze Asian financial crisis, or any financial crisis for that matter, money must matter, finance must matter. You should have financial markets modeled in a meaningful way, and you should also show the interactions and feedback effects from the financial side of the economy to the real sector and vice versa. Okay, so that's pretty much what I said already. And there are specific technical issues that you have to tackle, of course, which I had to do in this particular model for Asian financial crisis. Okay, there are theoretical issues, and that's captured by this last statement that Keynes or Keynesian type of theories or post-Keynesian theories are different from neoclassical general equilibrium theory. as I said, money really doesn't play a very theoretically useful role in the general equilibrium theory that are neoclassical in orientation. And non-neutrality of money is also very important, that money has real effects even in the long run. Sherman Robinson, who is a pioneer actually in this kind of modeling for developing countries, classifies various schools of modeling. One he calls fundamentalist school. This is really expressed in the slogan that there is only one model and its prophet is Valdra. Valdra was this 19th century economist, as you know, who thought that you could solve the general equilibrium model by counting the number of variables and the number of equations, and if they equaled, then you had a solution, which of course was not that easy. Even to solve that model rigorously, we had to wait till basically the 1950s, early 1950s, when Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu almost simultaneously solved this problem in a very elegant and mathematically convincing way. And Robinson's second school is called Baha'i school. You know, Baha'i are supposed to be this very tolerant segment of Islamic practitioners. In fact, fundamentalist Islamicists may not recognize them as belonging within the tent. But here you integrate financial variables and asset markets into a neoclassical Walrasian CGE model and draw from all schools. And there are some names here that you may not know, but people have done that. I think to some extent, I certainly occasionally can be classified as falling under this school, but I think I am more ecumenical. So here it says, render unto Valra the things which are Valras, and unto Keynes the things which are Keynes. And I would go even beyond and